I've told this story maybe 3 times in my life, and every time I've told it, I've left something out. Not because I was lying, because I still don't know how to say the parts that don't fit anywhere. They just sit outside the story like furniture that came with a house you never asked for. This was 11 years ago now. My son doesn't remember any of it, which I'm grateful for most days. My husband remembers it the way you remember a bad flu, a stretch of time you'd rather not go back into. I'm the only one who kept turning it over. So if any of this sounds too neat, that's just what happens when you carry something long enough. The edges wear down. You start to doubt your own memory of your own life. But I want to be honest about one thing before I start. I'm not going to tell you what it was. I don't know what it was. I'm going to tell you what happened, in the order it happened, and you can decide for yourself. I've decided already, a long time ago, and I still can't say it out loud. We bought the house in the fall. We weren't rich, and we weren't careful. We were tired. That's the honest version. Paul and I had been renting a 2-bedroom for 4 years, and Sam had just turned 4, and the landlord had raised the rent twice, and every listing we could afford in the city was a box with someone else's cooking still in the walls. So when our agent sent us a place 40 minutes out, past the last exit that had a gas station, past the point where the streetlights stop and the county roads take over, we didn't dismiss it the way we should have. The photos were good. Too good in the way that should have told us something, but at the time it just felt like luck. 3 bedrooms, a real yard, a stand of pines along the back edge of the property that ran into what the listing called wooded acreage, a finished basement, a detached garage the previous owner had used as a workshop, and the price was low, not scam low. Just low enough that Paul kept refreshing the listing to make sure the number hadn't changed. Our agent, I'll call her Dana because that was close to her name, told us the owner was motivated. I asked what that meant, and she said the man who'd lived there had gotten older, and his family had moved him somewhere they could look after him, and they just wanted it sold. Estate sale, more or less, except he was still alive. She said it fast, the way you say a thing you've decided not to think about. I didn't think about it either. We drove out to see it on a Sunday. I remember the drive because the light changed as we went. In the city it had been that flat gray autumn overcast, but the further out we got, the lower and thicker the clouds seemed to sit, until we came over a small rise and the whole valley below us was under a lid of it, and the house was down there in the middle of a wet green field with the pines black behind it. Paul said, "Well, that's dramatic," and I laughed, and Sam was asleep in the back, and that was the last completely ordinary moment I can point to before all of it. The house itself was fine, better than fine. It was clean, that's the thing I keep coming back to. It was very clean. The kind of clean that a house that's been empty for a while shouldn't be. Empty houses get dusty. They get that closed-up smell, the still air, the dead flies on the windowsills. This one didn't have any of that. The floors were swept. The windows were clear. There was a faint smell of something like pine cleaner, and under it, something warmer that I couldn't place and didn't try to. Dana walked us through it. She talked the whole time, the way agents do, filling every silence so you don't have room to hear the house. Big kitchen, good bones, new water heater. She kept moving us forward, room to room, and I remember she didn't slow down in the back bedroom. She sort of gestured at the doorway and kept walking, and I stopped in it for a second on my own. It was the smallest of the 3 bedrooms, at the back of the house, with one window that looked out at the pines. And it was warmer than the rest of the house. Noticeably. The heat wasn't on. Dana had mentioned that. The furnace was off. The utilities were in a holding state between owners, but that room was warm, the way a room is warm when someone's been sitting in it. I told myself it was the afternoon sun through the window, except there was no sun. There hadn't been all day. I stood there maybe 10 seconds. Then Sam called for me from the kitchen, and I went, and I forgot about it. Or I set it down somewhere I couldn't reach, which isn't the same as forgetting. We made an offer that week. It was accepted in a day. Paul said we were the luckiest people alive. The closing was quick and strange in the way that these things are only strange in hindsight. We never met the previous owner. His name was on the paperwork. Emmett, and a signature, but the signature was small and careful, like a man writing his name at the bottom of a permission slip, and it was witnessed by someone I assumed was his daughter, because her last name was different, but her middle name was the same as his last. She handled everything. I never saw her either. Everything went through Dana and through the title company, and one Tuesday, the house was ours, and we got the keys in a little envelope with the address written on it in that same small, careful hand. There were 3 keys: front door, back door, and one that didn't fit anything we could find. We tried it in the garage. We tried it in the basement door. We tried it in every lock in the house, and it didn't turn any of them. Paul put it in the kitchen drawer, the one that fills up with the keys and batteries and take-out menus of your whole life, and we didn't think about it again for a while. We moved in over a weekend. It rained both days. I want you to understand that most of what I'm going to tell you happened against the background of a house that was, in every ordinary way, wonderful. We were happy those first weeks. That's what I lose when I tell it. I make it sound like we knew from the beginning, and we didn't. We were unpacking boxes and arguing about where the couch went and eating pizza off paper towels on the floor, and it was one of the better times of our marriage. The wrongness didn't arrive all at once. It came in the way water comes into a basement. You don't see it happen. You just notice one day that the floor is wet and you can't remember it ever being dry. The first thing was the path. Behind the house, the lawn ran back maybe 80 feet to where the pines started. And through that lawn, from the back door to the tree line, there was a path worn into the grass. Not a paved path. Just a track where the grass grew thinner and the ground was packed down, the way it gets when someone walks the same line over and over for years. It curved slightly. It didn't go anywhere obvious. It just went to the trees, to a gap between 2 of the bigger pines, and then it was gone under the needles. I noticed it the first morning from the kitchen window, and I thought, an old man lived here alone for a long time. Of course he had a path. Maybe he walked out to the woods every day. Maybe he had a spot back there he liked. That's a completely normal thing for a person to have. I decided it was sweet, actually, this old man and his daily walk to the trees, and I felt a little tender toward him, this Emmett I'd never met, walking out to look at his woods every day until he couldn't anymore. It was Paul who pointed out, about a week later, that the path was still there. That doesn't sound like anything. Let me say it better. Grass grows back. A path worn by someone who stopped walking it because he'd moved out months ago because he was old and gone and living somewhere else. That path should have started to fill in, especially in the fall with the rain we were getting. And it wasn't filling in. If anything, the packed line of it looked fresh. There was a spot near the tree line where the mud held the shape of a shoe, and rain should have softened that shape within a day, and it didn't. Paul mentioned it the way you mention a thing you've already explained to yourself. He said, "The mailman, maybe, or somebody cutting through." And I said, "Sure," and neither of us said the obvious thing, which was that the path went from our back door to the woods, and no mailman cuts through a stranger's backyard to walk into the trees behind their house. I started keeping the back door locked. I told myself it was just a habit worth having, out here where the nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile off. I didn't tell Paul I'd started doing it. I noticed, later, that he'd started checking it at night without telling me either. The neighbor came by in our second week. Her name was Laureen, and she lived in the yellow house you could just see down the county road. And she brought a foil-covered dish of something and stood on our porch and was kind in the specific, careful way of country people who've decided to like you but aren't sure yet. I liked her. I want to say that because of how the rest of it went. She was maybe 70, sharp-eyed, and she looked past me into the house the whole time she talked. Not rudely, just taking it in. She asked how we were settling. She admired the yard. And then she said a thing that I turned over for weeks afterward. She said, "It's good to see lights on in there again." And I said something like, "It's a lovely house, we feel lucky," and she nodded. And there was a pause, and then she said, "He kept it so nice, right up to the end." And I said, "Emmett?" Because I was proud of myself for knowing his name, and she gave me a look I didn't understand at the time, a small correction in her face, like I'd stepped on something. She said, "That's right." And then she said she'd better get back, and she left the dish, and she went down the porch steps and along the road to her yellow house, and she didn't come back. Not once, the whole time we lived there. She waved from her yard, sometimes when I was in mine, but she never crossed onto the property again. I didn't understand the look until much later. Right up to the end. I'd assumed she meant the end of his time in the house, when he'd moved out. But you don't say, right up to the end about a man who packed up and went to live near his daughter. You say that about someone who died. I never asked Dana. I never asked anyone. By the time I understood what Laureen had almost told me, I didn't want it confirmed. Some doors you notice are open, and you just quietly close them, because you already know you don't want to see the room. Here's where it gets hard to tell, because from here on, nothing I can point to would sound like anything to a stranger. It was all small. That was the nature of it. Every single thing on its own had a reasonable explanation, and I reached for every one of them, and I believed every one of them for exactly as long as I needed to. The mug. We had a set of 6 mugs, and I'm particular, and I keep them in a row on a shelf with the handles all turned the same way, to the right. It's a small compulsion, it's nothing, but it means I notice. And more than once, 3 or 4 times over a couple of weeks. I'd come into the kitchen in the morning, and one mug would be turned. Handle to the left. Just the one. Everything else exactly as I'd left it. I asked Paul if he'd used a mug in the night, and he hadn't, and I decided Sam had gotten into the cabinet, except Sam couldn't reach the shelf, and I decided I'd turned it myself and not noticed, and I started turning them all a little too carefully, checking twice, the way you do when you've stopped fully trusting your own hands. The groceries. Once, and only once, and I have never been able to make this one comfortable. I bought a rotisserie chicken, the kind in the plastic dome. I put it in the fridge. The next evening I went to make dinner, and it was there, in its container, and someone had eaten from it. Not a lot. A leg, some of the breast, taken cleanly, the way a person eats when they're being neat about it. Paul swore he hadn't. I believed him, because Paul would have eaten half of it standing at the counter and left the mess. That's just who he is. Sam wouldn't touch chicken that wasn't nuggets. I stood there holding the container, and I did the math 3 or 4 different ways, and none of them worked, and finally I just told myself I'd cut into it myself, for lunch, and forgotten. I threw it out. I didn't tell Paul about the part where I couldn't remember doing it, because there was no part where I'd done it. I just needed there to be. The sound. This one had a schedule, and that's what made it worse than the rest. Around 3 in the morning? Not exactly 3, but in that dead hour. There was a sound from the back of the house that I came to think of as the settling sound, because that's what I called it to myself. A slow, soft, weight-on-wood sound. Like a floorboard taking a step's worth of pressure and letting it off again. Just one. Sometimes 2. Houses settle, everyone knows that. Old houses especially, the temperature drops at night and the wood contracts and it pops and creaks. Except settling is random. It doesn't happen at the same hour every night, in the same part of the house, in the same slow rhythm. Press, release, the exact rhythm of a person crossing a room who doesn't want to be heard. It came from the back bedroom, the warm one. The one we decided not to use as a bedroom because Sam wanted the one next to ours, and so it had become the room where we put the boxes we hadn't unpacked, and the exercise bike Paul never rode, and it stayed closed most of the time. I'd lie awake and hear it and tell myself it was the boxes settling, cardboard relaxing, and I knew cardboard doesn't make a sound like a foot. And I'd lie there and listen to the whole house being silent around that one soft rhythm until it stopped, and then I'd finally sleep. I never once got up to check. I want to be truthful about that. In the movies, people get up and go look. I never did. Some animal part of me had already decided that whatever was making the sound was not something I wanted to be standing in front of with a phone flashlight and bare feet at 3 in the morning. So I stayed in bed, and I listened, and in the morning the room was just a room full of boxes, warm, with the window looking out at the pines and the path. Sam started talking about the man in November. I've thought a lot about how to tell this part because I know how it sounds. Children have imaginary friends. Children in new houses with parents who are stressed and distracted and unpacking boxes invent people to keep them company. I knew all of that then. I'm not a superstitious person. I held on to the ordinary explanation with both hands, and I'm going to tell you exactly what he said and let you hold on to it too, if you can. The first time he was in the bath, and he said, not to me, just out loud, "The man says the water's too hot." And I checked the water, and it wasn't too hot, and I said, "What man, baby?" And Sam said, "The one who lives here," and went back to his toys. And I felt something, and I put it down, because that's what you do. He'd heard us talk about the previous owner. Kids repeat things. I asked him a couple of gentle questions, the way you're supposed to. Is the man nice? Is he a friend? And Sam said the man wasn't a friend. The man was just here, and that was somehow so much worse than if he'd said the man was a monster. Just here. Like weather. like a fact of the house you learn to live with. Over the next few weeks, it came up the way real things come up with a small child. Sideways, in fragments, never when you want it to. He didn't like the back bedroom. He said the man was resting in there and we shouldn't wake him. He told me once, matter of fact, buttering his own toast into a mangled mess, that the man watched us eat, not in a scared way. He wasn't scared. That's the part I couldn't get past. Sam was never scared. It was Paul and I who got quieter and quieter, checking doors, and Sam just went about his life in a house that, as far as he was concerned, came with a man in it, the way it came with a furnace and a mailbox. The night I stopped being able to pretend was the night Sam woke up around that dead hour and I went to him. And he was sitting up, calm, and he pointed at his bedroom door, which was open a few inches into the dark hallway, and he said, "He's checking on us. He does that." And I looked at the doorway, at the dark strip of hall, and I couldn't see anything, and I couldn't hear anything, but I had the complete and physical certainty that the hallway was not empty. I can't defend it. There was nothing there to see. But I stood between my son and that open door, and I did not turn the hall light on, because I did not want to know if I was right. I got Sam back to sleep. Then I went and got in bed next to Paul, and I lay there facing the bedroom door, and I said very quietly into the dark, "I think there's something wrong with the house." And Paul, who I'd assumed was asleep, said, without moving, without any surprise at all, "I know." And that was the worst moment of all of it, honestly. Not any of the sounds. That. My husband saying "I know" in a voice that told me he'd known for a while and hadn't said anything either, because he'd been doing the same thing I'd been doing, which was talking himself out of it every single day so that we could keep living our lives in a house we'd just spent everything we had to buy. We started looking, after that, in the daytime, together. That felt safer, somehow, the two of us with the sun up, going through the house like people who'd lost their keys. The basement was finished. Like the listing said, carpet, drywall, a low ceiling, a couple of bare bulbs. But the finished part didn't go all the way back. There was a section under the back of the house behind a plywood partition that was unfinished. A crawl space, really, but tall enough to stand in if you stooped. The partition had a door in it, a plain little door with a latch, and the latch was the kind you'd fit a small padlock to, and there was no padlock. And I remembered the third key, the one that didn't fit anything. I got it out of the kitchen drawer while Paul held the flashlight. I want to tell you the key didn't fit, because that would be easier. It fit. There was no padlock to use it on, but I understood then what the key was for, because the latch mechanism itself had a little keyed cylinder, and the key turned it, smooth and oiled, like it had been turned 1,000 times. Behind the door, in the low unfinished space under the back bedroom, someone had been living. Not living the way you live in a house. Living the way you live somewhere you're not supposed to be. There was a camp mattress, an old one, but the blankets on it were folded, squared off, the corners tight, the way I'd fold them, the way a person folds bedding they use every day and takes care of. There was a plastic milk crate turned on its side with things in it, arranged. A couple of paperback books, a wind-up clock, a comb, a mug from a set of 6 that did not belong to us because ours were all accounted for upstairs. There was a shelf someone had wedged between 2 joists, and on the shelf there were candles, and a lighter and a folded map of the county, and a small stack of what turned out to be the previous owner's mail, Emmett's mail, forwarded from somewhere, with a name on the redirect label that I recognized, because it was the daughter's name from the closing paperwork. And there was a spot on the crawlspace wall, at about sitting height, where someone had made a hole, not a big one. A knothole they'd worked at until it went through, the size of a coin, and the drywall on the other side of that wall was the drywall of the finished basement. And if you knew where to look, and I went and looked, there was a matching mark low on the finished side, behind where we'd put a bookshelf, painted over so you'd never notice. That lined up with a vent. That lined up with the floor register in the room above, which was Sam's room. I'm not going to tell you someone was watching my son through the walls of our house. I'm going to tell you there was a hole, and it lined up, and I have never been able to make it mean anything else, and I've tried, because I have to live inside my own head, and it's easier in here if it means nothing. We didn't touch anything. We backed out and shut the little door, and I locked it with the key, which felt insane even as I did it, locking a door as if that would keep out someone who'd had a key of his own the whole time. We went upstairs. It was maybe 2 in the afternoon. The house was warm and quiet and clean, our boxes half unpacked, Sam's drawings on the fridge, and it looked exactly like it had that first Sunday, and I understood, finally, why it had been kept. All that cleanliness that shouldn't have been there in an empty house. Someone had been keeping it. It had never been empty at all. We left that afternoon. We didn't decide to move out in any formal way. We just packed a bag for Sam and a bag for us. And I said I wanted to stay at my mother's for a few days, and Paul didn't argue, and we drove out of that valley up over the rise, and Sam waved at the house out the back window the way he waved at everything. And Paul watched him do it in the mirror, and his jaw was tight, and he didn't say anything. We never spent another night there. That's the truth. We paid a mortgage on that house for 11 more months while we figured out how to sell it, and we drove back exactly twice, both times in daylight, both times together, to get our things out, movers and all, in and out fast. The crawl space, when the movers were there, I made Paul go and check while I stood in the yard with Sam. He came out pale and said the mattress was gone. The blankets, the crate, the candles, the mail, all of it, gone. Like it had never been there. Only the hole was still in the wall, and the key still turned the latch, and the little door still swung open on nothing. Someone had known we found it. Someone had known we were coming back and when, and had cleaned up and left before we got there, emptied the space and folded up his life and taken it out through the gap in the pines, along the path that never grew back, before we could bring anyone to see it. I called Dana once, near the end. I asked her, straight out, what happened to Emmett. There was a long pause. She said his family had sold the house because he'd passed away, that he'd lived there alone almost 40 years and hadn't wanted to leave, and it had been hard on everyone at the end, and the family had just wanted it done, wanted it off their hands. I asked when he'd died, and she told me a date, and I did the arithmetic standing in my mother's kitchen, and the date was 2 months before we ever drove out to see the house. 2 months before the warm back bedroom, before the path, before the mug turned to the left in the morning, before the leg taken cleanly off the chicken, before the soft rhythm crossing the floor at 3, before my son said, "He's checking on us. He does that." I never told Dana any of it. What would I have said? I thanked her, and I hung up, and I stood in the kitchen for a while. We sold the house eventually, for less than we paid, to a young couple I never met and have thought about more than I'd like. I almost wrote them a letter. I got as far as the first line a few times. But everything I could think to write sounded insane, and none of it was anything I could prove, and in the end I decided that if I couldn't tell them what to watch for, I shouldn't frighten them with what I couldn't name. I've had to make my peace with that. Some nights I don't sleep well over it. Most nights I do. That's just how it goes. After enough years. I don't know what it was. I've laid it out as plainly as I can, and you've heard all of it now, everything except the parts I don't have words for. I know how it wants to be explained. A man lived alone for 40 years and loved his house too much to leave it, and when his body left, something of the habit of him stayed, the path he walked, the room he sat in, the rounds he made at night, and it kept keeping the house tidy and warm, the way he always had, and it did not understand or did not care that the house was ours now, because as far as it was concerned, the house had always been his and always would be, and we were the strangers. We were the ones who didn't belong, moving our boxes into his rooms while he watched us from the wall and folded his blankets in the dark. That's one way to explain it. The other way is that a living man had a key in a hole in the wall and nowhere else to go, and knew every sound that house could make, and moved through it around us for weeks, and vanished into the trees the moment we found his nest, and that would honestly be worse, and I've never decided which one I believe, and I've stopped trying. There's one more thing, and then I'll stop. When we were packing the last of it, the final trip, I found the little key envelope in the junk drawer, the one that had come with the house, with the address written on it in that small, careful hand. And I want to be careful here because I've told this part twice, and both times I've watched the person's face change, and I know how it lands. There had been 3 keys. Front, back, and the one for the crawlspace latch. I know there were 3 because we tried all of them in every lock that first week, the 2 of us laughing about the mystery key. I'd have sworn to it in court. When I picked up the envelope that last day, there were 4. The 4th one was newer than the others. Brighter cut. Still shiny at the edges the way a key is before your pocket wears it down. And it fit our front door. I tried it standing in the empty living room with the movers carrying the couch out past me, and it turned the deadbolt smooth as anything, a key to our house that we had never had made, sitting in our drawer waiting. The whole time we lived there. We changed nothing, of course. We were leaving. I put all 4 keys back in the envelope and I left it on the kitchen counter for the new couple, because that's what you do. You leave the keys for the next people. And I've thought, more than once in the years since, that I should have taken that 4th key and thrown it in a river. That I handed those 2 strangers a key to their own front door that neither they nor I ever cut, and told them nothing, and drove away over the rise and never looked back. That's the part I always leave out. So now you have all of it. I still don't know what was wrong with that house. I only know it was wrong before we ever got there. That whatever it was already home. Already keeping the mugs in their row and the blankets folded square, already walking out to the pines and back, and that it let us stay a while and watched us, and knew our schedule better than we did, and cleaned up after itself when we finally noticed, and let us go. It let us go. Hold on to that. Most nights it's enough.